All right. I guess we are live. Thank you for joining, everyone. Let's give a minute for everyone to trickle in. Great. Okay, I'll kick it off. I'm super happy to be here. I'm Anand Tangaraju. I currently serve as the field CISO for a company called E Plus Security, and I'm here to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to me about SEC cybersecurity disclosure. I don't know how many of you are very close to this emerging regulatory driver. My experience in the cyberspace has always been in like highly regulated industries like finance and some of the fintech companies. So happy to share my insights on how to prepare for this. And without much ado, let me just do a quick introduction of Anand here. I've spent about 20 years in the industry, mostly as a cybersecurity and a data practitioner, and always been with banks. I've spent corporate roles in JP Morgan, Cognizant, I've spent about 2 years in Ernst and Young in the West Coast region. Spent about a decade in Silicon Valley Bank. I saw the entire story breakout and had to go through the merger and acquisition scenario. Apart from my regular day job, I'm a firm believer in supporting the ecosystem. I'm part of many of the startups here as an angel advisor. I'm also helping some of the VCs to help them vet their leads into the portfolio. And just like everybody else, I'm an AI evangelist, try to learn as much as possible to prepare for what's coming. And that's just a quick gist about me. And moving on, today's agenda, I know it's a 30-minute session, and I have a lot to unpack. It's almost like an hour's worth that I'm trying to cram into it. So I'll try to be reasonable. The way we'll approach this is the SEC rule is out. It came 2 years back, and it's been in the making for a while, and there's been some high-profile cases about SEC prosecuting some CEOs, CISOs, and there's been a lot of dialogue around it. And how are we going to prepare for this? How are we going to protect our business value and not get into the wrong side of some of this regulation? So we'll talk about the key highlights of the regulation and the kind of capabilities we want to ensure that exist, and how is everybody dealing with? Because I mean, if you take a look at all the SEC filings, you'll see a wide variety of maturity gaps. Not everybody is able to meet that right away. So we'll talk about what's the current state and how to quickly ramp up your maturity. And then I want to spend my rest of the talk on risk appetite, because I believe that's the core fundamental problem that you should solve to be able to meet all the future regulatory obligations that comes out of it, be it materiality or how do you know that your risk posture is improving or not, and so on and so forth. Everything comes down to having a tone from the top around risk appetite. So that's what we will dive into it, and also a case study on how it's implemented in a real life scenario. So hopefully this is going to be informative. In terms of regulation itself, I'm not going to bore you. This is more of the highlights. You can always look it up. This disclosure deadline started end of 2023, and the key takeaway is everybody should be monitoring material cybersecurity incidents. It's been several decades. We've been seeing news about cybersecurity mishaps, and it seems to be getting more prevalent. So the point about SEC is, of course, it's going to happen, but is that is the scale of that being sufficiently disclosed for the investors to be able to make their like informed decisions, right? And of course, the entire financial services industry, the SEC, they have adopted various mechanisms to share these information for their quarterly and annual filings. So it's more about understanding the current forms and different ways we can share that information. All of that will be due by end of this year, and starting from 2025. every company which is publicly listed needs to have the basic infrastructure to disclose their incidents and disclose their overall cyber posture as part of their filings. And it's not that they don't have any, because I'm sure like every company that goes IPO, they have set up that basic function within their CFO, but they don't get to work closely with the CIOs or CISOs in in the past. So I've seen like this whole section around cybersecurity is has been very lean. So that's where the SEC is trying to get more active in trying to question, are we disclosing enough? So I'll leave it there. And in terms of the forms itself, you need to think about quarterly disclosures and annual. So the 10K is what everybody is familiar with. The 8Ks are more detailed on a per incident basis. Whenever there is an incident, you have to notify it within certain time period, and you need to disclose the exposure in terms of number of records impacted, and what's the impact for your forward-looking revenue, and so on and so forth. And the 10K is where you talk about your overall cybersecurity program. How mature are you? What are you doing to improve your controls? And what kind of governance exists? How is your board interacting with you, and so on and so forth, right? And of course, if you care more about the cyber governance, then the tactical aspects of materiality and reporting becomes a lot more easier. This slide I'm going to skip. This is available on the SEC site, but I just put it out to say that like if somebody is questioning why should I even care, this is why. You probably heard about the Silvergate bank, which is a cryptocurrency bank which collapsed, along with SVB, sadly, where I was part of, and that started another investigation specifically around how crypto banks are regulated, and why cybersecurity is so important within the new blockchain ecosystem. And another high-profile case is the SolarWinds, where the chief information security officer was called for testimony, and that created a whole debate about like who is ultimately responsible for these kind of events. And I'll let you dig into the SEC website for more information on this, but we should definitely care about it. And this slide is just breaking down the requirements into three major pillars, and that's how the entire rule is structured as well. You have a incident reporting capability, you have a cyber risk management and strategy, and a governance. The way you want to look at this is, again, the incident reporting is the most tactical part, and the cyber risk management and strategy is the operational aspects, where you have a middle level manager or the CISOs directs trying to have a very good hygiene around cybersecurity programs and budgeting, linking your cyber program with the company's strategy. And that's where the conversations around what is material, and what are the capabilities existing to address the data breach and communicate to to the stakeholders. All those happens, and the cyber governance is the most strategic part, where you talk about, is the board savvy enough to hold the management accountable for these kind of incidents, and how are they communicating the tone from the top? How are they reviewing the posture, and all the committee specific cadence, and this is where the risk appetite is also finally signed off. Like the board needs to be on board with the overall risk appetite that the company is operating in. Moving on, these are some more detailed slides. I won't go into this because I want to spend a little bit more time on cyber risk appetite. So this slide is just breaking down each of these capabilities and what you need to have. And I'm going to share the slides as well, so feel free to dig into it later on. And I have another slide that focuses more on maturity of current companies in each of these three pillars. Sadly, I would say like 80% of the companies in the Fortune 500 are still in probably like 2 or 3 out of 5 maturity, which is reasonable, because for you to be like completely prepared on on complying with all the regulations, you want to have a board that has a cyber expert. You want to have cyber quantification in place where everything that you do, every cybersecurity risk is quantified or has some kind of a basis to say whether it's critical or low. And I don't think any of the companies have achieved that level of maturity. So uh, and focus for today's discussion again, it's all coming back to risk appetite. And since I come from a regulated industry, I've seen this in every single bank I've walked into. There is a chief risk officer, there is an enterprise risk management function that thinks about what are all the risks we carry across the company and what are the things that can really kill us. And you want to have some kind of hygiene on defining your entire risk capacity for your organization. That's the biggest universe of risks that you can absorb and still be solvent. But that's not what you really want to hit. And you want to come up with a smaller bubble within that, which is your risk appetite, where you're comfortable going that far because without risk there is no opportunity. So it's just two sides of the coin. So you want to make informed decisions, and for that you need to set guardrails for every single leader on their day-to-day business decisions. And that's where the risk appetite versus the capacity becomes an important conversation that the board should initiate. And later on I have another slide that argues who should really own the risk appetite. It's really the board, not the management, right? So the management might might be biased towards accepting more risk for whatever incentives are driving them. So ultimately, the board has the right kind of agency to define what is best for all the stakeholders. And then once that is decided, then you have multiple layers of onion to peel, which is how are you going to monitor whether you're hitting the risk appetite. You don't want to be seeing the alarm when you've already breached the appetite. You want to have tolerance levels. You want to have individual risk targets for your business units that's cascaded. And when you look at this, it's very much the same as any other strategic goal a CEO would cascade down, like what you would call as a balanced scorecard. This is just think of this as the risk version of it, right? And if you can implement this through your policies and procedures, that's a very good first step you're taking towards achieving a risk appetite program. And the second one, I just quickly alluded on that. Of course, risk appetite cannot survive on its own. You need to have a strategic goals and tie it back to the company's values, mission. What are the business drivers that you're prioritizing, and the risks that come with that, right? So this is basically a cascading of strategy to your appetite, and that further cascades into business objectives. You can see that you're balancing your business objectives and looking at the risk appetite. Like I said, those are two sides of the coin. So every conversation at a business unit level or a functional unit level should see both ends. And that's why an ERM function or a second line function trying to provide the challenge to the business is very, very important. And it's very much adopted into the I would say the regulated industries, but I'm talking to other companies that may not be at that level of maturity and not very familiar with the three lines of defense model and so on and so forth. Moving on, once you have this risk appetite defined, then the key uh, uh, the key requirement from the SEC rule is to be able to say if something is material or not. And again, this is a very loosely defined term. SEC would not define what materiality really means. It can only provide you the guidance, because every business is different, and what is material to you may not be material enough for another company. So they have left it completely open. There's a lot of gray areas today, but if you have a risk appetite conversation, then you already know what is the limit and what could actually kill your bank or company, or what could be material not just for you, but for your stakeholders, your customers, and thereby impacting you in an indirect way as a reputational damage or whatnot, right? So we're not going to go into the materiality area again. There's a whole concept of how do you define materiality for different types of risks, and how to operationalize it. That's not today's agenda, but that very, very critical for SEC's compliance. And if you ask like where do I start? I mean, I don't think SEC's guidance is enough. There's a lot of gray areas, a lot of open ends. I would strongly suggest taking a look at any of these other reference frameworks available. And again, it depends on the industry you operate in. So the ISO 31000 is a risk management framework standard that's applicable across industries. Then you have Federal Reserve's specific regulatory guidance, which goes by the SR numbers, which towards the left, I see like number 2 to 5 are all very much focused on banking. Financial Stability Board has its own risk appetite framework principles for the board. You have the Basel Committee from European Union, which also has sound operational risk management guidelines. So there's plenty available for you to pick and align yourself depending on where you are. But I understand that beyond the finance or insurance industries, there's not a lot of good guidance for risk appetite. So that's something that needs to mature. I already mentioned about who owns it's there's no doubt the board owns the risk appetite. They need to sign off on that, and they need to hold the management accountable through due care and due diligence, and to be able to prove that they had a reasonable uh, I mean, every decision they have made, they have reviewed all the information about the company, and they should be able to prove that they acted on behalf of all the stakeholders. And that's becoming more and more important in terms of like being eligible for board positions, and and it's sort of acting as as a chief risk officer uh, is, in other public companies. So very important to engage the board and also have a direct line of access with the board for the key functions like the chief information officer or security officer, so that they don't have to go through the CEO for every single decision. Well, so far we spent our time on, again, talking about risk appetite and what are the fundamental requirements. Now I wanted to spend a little bit of time on how the risk appetite is formulated. So you take a simple example of, let's say, even if it's a very low probability event like a data breach, I hope it doesn't touch wood happen very often to you, but it could happen. And you want to think through that and write a statement. What is acceptable for your business? Is it losing 1 million customer PI records? That's a big deal, but it could happen. And then you want to write what are all the different drivers that could have that could trigger this breach. It could be something that exists as an issue that you haven't fixed, or you have accepted as something that you can live with, because nobody has zero vulnerabilities in their environment. They are lying if they say so. Those are the things you want to put it in paper, saying that I will have no more than one exploitable condition every three years, or an exploitable condition discovered and remediated within 48 hours. So all these individual statements give a lot of clarity for your teams to stay within the risk appetite. And obviously, that's going to be the hardest part, to make sure it's part of their day-to-day standards and procedures, and how exactly are they trained on that, and so on and so forth. Now, anatomy of a risk appetite. So this is a great way to write a risk appetite. Less than 5% of probability in the next 12 months of a disclosure of 1 million PII records. It gives you a lot of objectivity around it. And if you look at the good criteria for risk appetite, it has to be something that's realistic. You cannot say we'll we'll avoid all risk at all cost, which is not reasonable for any business. So you wanna provide a number, you wanna provide a time bound, and you wanna have something that's agreed upon across the units, across the functions. There is no a chance of misinterpretation and so on and so forth. So I would say, yeah, try to adopt some of the good practices and vet every single risk appetite statement. And in reality, you only need like 10 or 20. I've seen like for a bank like SVB, I've seen 40 statements, right? That's covering the entire landscape of the company. And I'm going to skip this slide in the interest of time. Florence, how are we doing on time? Maybe another 10 minutes. All right. Yeah, let's keep going. And I wanted to show this as a possible dashboard, like how do you visualize the entire risk appetite presentation to the board, and how can you tell the story? It's all about communicating this to the leaders who may not be savvy in cybersecurity best practices or day-to-day risks, but they still want to be able to get it by seeing it. So for that, you want to have an inventory of risk categories and risks that matters for your company, and then you want to map it out to your specific business objectives. And there's more that you can do on top of this. You want to look at the industry you're operating in, the threat environment, the latest emerging threats. That is something that you want to focus on. When you look at all of these, it helps you prioritize on the risk categories that you really want to monitor for the current year, and then eventually you want to have a normalized scale. No matter what is the type of risk, you want to be able to say you're going to fit it into a 5-point scale, and you can explain what a zero risk versus a tolerant. Sorry, a zero is basically an absence of any controls versus a very tolerant environment. So you want to be able to define that and keep it as an appendix for your risk appetite statements. And and then you also want to have metrics that is live and coming from your systems and not something that somebody is making up, to be able to look at the trending. Because in most of the cases, like I mentioned, going back to the onion of risk universe, you want to have internal guardrails and thresholds set so that you know that you're approaching your risk appetite and you have enough time to address that. Now, for the last couple of minutes, I wanted to spend a time on how all of this knowledge can be translated into action. So I have a hypothetical company called Pair Incorporated, and the way you would incorporate the risk appetite statements, you'll have a high-level risk appetite statement for the entire company, and you would break it down by tolerance scenarios into different low risk to critical risk categories. So an example of a low risk could be unauthorized access, use, or release of parent corporate customers and firms' personal identifiable information, which, like I said, it happens every once in a while for every company. You read that about it. So that is still reasonable if you can contain it to a few records, or if you have a good mechanism to respond to it quickly. But if you move on to other scenarios like a moderate risk or a high risk, you would a simple example of a moderate risk would be reliance on third-party vendors for any kind of technology services, because you might think you have control over them, but you really don't. You just hope that they have the same kind of or similar posture, and you just rely on SOC tools and other kind of documentation available to you to be able to vet their risk level. So overall, I would say that puts you in a very dicey situation. You wanna be able to monitor that on a more frequent basis. And when I say something is high risk, it means you have more controls to add defense in depth, and you're paying close attention to it, right? So these are some examples of how risk appetite statements scenarios will look like. These minded, this is more like a policy level statements, and then you would go one level down to quantify it and make it something that's very, very much actionable for an operational team. And then what the board or the executive management would like to see is just a simple one pager that covers the entire cybersecurity landscape. So it could be, well, how is your cybersecurity threats? Is it for your particular company? It's more about the environment, not about what defenses you have. You could be subscribing to cyber threat intelligence and other ISACs. So the first two is more about external facing threats and how are you guarded against those. And then you go into the internal inside your castle, what kind of current capabilities exist to continuously monitor your posture and adapt to uh, any incidents or events. And that again comes down to like what kind of vulnerabilities you're living with, the tech debt, and the amount of money you have to buy all the latest and greatest tooling to make that happen. So you can see that you're starting from a more from an outside perspective to an inside the house, and also from a more strategic to tactical aspects like how are we responding to incidents, how are we clearing out our vulnerabilities, or it could be many other things like IAM, how are we dealing with uh, RBAC controls and user access reviews and so on and so forth. So once the board is able to consume this and are able to ask reasonable questions to the leadership, then you would want to provide them more details. If somebody wants to understand, dig deeper into it, you can have a much deeper conversation on all the risks from your risk register. That's important, and sort of giving your own scoring of what do you think is the likelihood and what is the possible impact. And this is going into the typical RCSA or risk assessment methodology. Everybody has a different flavor of it. But what is more important is again trying to elevate that to to a business context and to be able to say that overall, I think we have so many risks, but we have condensed it to these scenarios. And on an aggregate level, we think business operations disruption or denial of service, it's low. We have enough controls in place to take care of that. Maybe an internal fraud and abuse, you might say that is still high. We don't have an like an insider threat program. We are building it. So you would give the context of the risk, the overall likelihood of that happening, what could happen if it happens, what's the worst case scenario in terms of losses, and what are you doing about it? The what are you doing about part is where you talk about your controls, your issues that you're currently remediating, and also any strategic initiatives that you have in the pipeline. So, another view to look at the whole cyber risk appetite that obviously SEC would want to see is adopting standards like NIST. So this is a very simple table that goes by the NIST 5 functions, and it breaks down all of your different operations and categories within your cybersecurity team. And within a slide, it could give a good picture of how your controls are operating, what are the results of the latest control tests, and where is the gaps from audits and so on and so forth. So these are just examples I'm sharing. There's so many other ways you can adopt, but as you can see that for all of these, the fundamental requirement is to understand your risks and to be able to define the risk appetite at a more strategic level to be able to trickle down into these reporting. So I'll have share one other slide. Yeah, this is again more on the program initiatives. Maybe you have multi-year programs going on. You may be acquiring a different company. and you're starting to think about how to bring the security environments together, how to rationalize the the security investments. So that could be a multi-year project that you want to keep the board updated, and it might be worthwhile to even disclose in the SEC filings. So think of these as different things that you want to incorporate or improve in your board reporting. And normally the board reporting gets redacted, and the board decides what information should eventually flow into the SEC's disclosure. So that was my point of this whole discussion. I'll leave some time for any questions, but that's pretty much the rest of the slides. More examples and some memes that I really liked when you think about presenting to the board. So have fun. Do we have a Q&A chat or something that I should look at? Okay. So I guess that's my time. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to share this presentation, and the recording will be there. So, and hope to connect with each and everyone. My LinkedIn QR code is here, and hope to carry the conversation forward in any other channel possible. Thank you. Okay, there's few chats.